Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar on the impossible dream, bending the long arc of growth and profit towards social benefit at a time of climate emergency. I'd like to extend a particularly warm welcome to our distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Merle Lefkoff. My name is Roy Culpeper. I chair the group of 78. Je voudrais dire que cet événement se déroulera en anglais. Cependant, nous serions heureux de recevoir vos questions ou commentaires en français pendant la période de discussion. Merci. I'm making these introductory remarks in the traditional unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Indigenous peoples have inhabited the lands and waters of this territory for millennia. We must be ever mindful of the many lessons of their stewardship as we grapple with the climate emergency, and particularly with the clash between the economy and the environment. Before we hear from Merle, it is a great pleasure now for me to introduce our distinguished moderator, Sylvie Lemieux. Sylvie is a retired Lieutenant Colonel Army engineer and formerly an executive with the Public Service of Canada. Sylvie has on 2 occasions represented the Green Party of Canada in 2008 and 2011. In addition to being a graduate in civil engineering, she holds a Master of Arts degree in globalization and international development, as well as a doctorate in conflict studies. She is presently the co-chair of the Canadian Network to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Last and certainly not least, we are proud to have Sylvie on the board of the group of 78. Sylvie, thanks for being moderator, and over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm quite pleased to be the moderator today. Nice to see so many attending the presentation today. First, before I introduce Merle, I'd just like to direct everybody to the bottom of your screen where there's a little Q&A. So as Merle will be doing our presentation for the next 30 minutes, I will ask that you start writing your question in the Q&A box. And I will be the one basically selecting the question. We might not be able to take all the questions in, but I will be reading through the Q&A box and directing the question to Merle. I will not be taking any of the questions from raised hands during the presentation, so not to distract Merle during our presentation. So please write your question in the Q&A en français ou en anglais. I will translate the question to Merle. I'm sure she speaks many different languages, but the presentation will be in English. Allow me to just read a little bit of our very distinguished, biography. So it's my pleasure to invite my friend Merle to talk with you today. We've had many conversations in the past. I met Merle while I was doing my doctorate at St. Paul University, and we were working together on a program of work called Integrative Peace Building, and I can recognize some of our colleagues in the attendees list. So Merle just recently returned from facilitating a workshop at COP26. She defined herself as a social change entrepreneur whose passion and practice is devoted to the application of non-linear, complex system thinking to surviving the climate change on a much altered planet. Merle holds a doctorate in political science from Emory University and has been a mediator, facilitator, and a leadership trainer in active conflict zones around the world. She's received many different types of research appointment, and I hope that you will read the full description that was part of the poster to invite you today. I just want to say here that she provided me with these notes. In her biography, she says, a year earlier, former Chief of Australian Defence Force Admiral Chris Berry, in his foreword to a policy paper analyzing climate-related security threat in Australia, wrote, "Our intelligence and security services have a vital role to play and a fiduciary responsibility in accepting this existential climate threat and the need for a fundamentally different approach to its risk management. As a central to their consideration, their advice to government, the implication for outright conventional geopolitical threats. I have described our group to Merle as informed participant, and I had given her permission to trigger you in doing more for the environment. So it is my pleasure to introduce my friend Merle to our presentation today. Merle.
Thank you so much, Sophie. And hi, everybody. I think there are colleagues out there, even though I can't see you. And I want to say bonjour, which is about the amount of French that I have. But bonjour, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. As we begin, I want to send a special greeting to my friends and colleagues and all of you who are, may I call you now, Ottawa occupation survivors. And I want to share a few thoughts about the last month. This appears to me to be a clash between the rights and responsibilities of Canadian citizenship that is most recently defined in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms: freedom of conscience, of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. And then the accompanying responsibilities, which include, most insistently, following the rule of law and affirming Aboriginal and treaty rights. I spotted a t-shirt during the occupation walking around Santa Fe where I live, and the message said, "The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters." Next slide. The authors, my talk just went away. Let me get back. Okay. The authors of a new book, The Quiet Before, wondered, what changes the world? It's unclear, they admit, but they explore one of the answers. One of the things that changes the world, they write, is a group of people talking. The many ways to make this happen provides the case studies in the book, including, of course, internet platforms. There's nothing inherently vicious about a Facebook post, unless we remember that at any time an invitation to protest, for example, is posted on Facebook. What actually happens is that the post expands Facebook's reach, as well as the call to mobilize, as it unleashes so many emotional triggers. I watched one of the convoy organizers, as I've been following this, Tamara, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right, Tamara Litch from Medicine Hat, Alberta. I watched her on Facebook. She talked as though she owns Facebook, but Facebook actually owns her, along with the rest of us. Next slide. Last September was the 10th anniversary of Occupy Wall Street, another very different protest that didn't even begin on Facebook. The slide that you're looking at, I took this photo during Occupy. I was so excited to be at the birth of a new form of democratic self-organization and action. Now, many assume that the Occupy movement died a quick death and disappeared, including one of its key founders, Michael White. He's very young and he worked so hard, and in the depths of despair, because Occupy did not create a global revolution, Micah was quoted as saying, "We changed the discourse, we trained a whole new generation of activists, but we didn't change how power functions. That's what our real goal was." Others argue differently. Like Professor Michael Levitin, some of you may know his book. This is a new book about the Occupy movement. Occupy made protesting cool again, he writes. It injected activists with a new sense of courage. Confronting power and issuing demands through civil disobedience is now an ingrained part of Western political culture. Influenced by Occupy Wall Street, many nonviolent resistance movements have successfully continued to challenge political discourse. Here in the US, the Black Lives Matter protests, along with the Me Too movement, have been really successful in changing public policy already. Youth-led organizations demanding transformation as they worry about a secure future slipping away are in the streets today, everywhere, demanding environmental justice and climate action at the international, national, and local levels. The impassioned Gen Z climate generation, writes Levitin, didn't come out of nowhere. It emerged as a direct successor to Occupy Wall Street, whose activists helped redirect the original focus against economic equality, the 1% and the 99%, into a focused new strategic movement to save the living systems that support life on Earth. Original peoples, tribes, battled for 6 years to defeat the Keystone XL pipeline and joined the Standing Rock Sioux tribe as it worked to shut down the now illegal Dakota Access Pipeline. An ongoing First Nations movement, Idle No More, which I know some of you know, begun in 2012, continues to resist resource extraction on native lands. And in the UK in 2018, Extinction Rebellion began their first major protest, mobilizing 1,000 people in Parliament Square, demanding a global declaration of climate emergency, carbon neutrality by 2025, and a citizens' assembly on solutions to global warming. Levitin's book concludes, prior to Occupy, no mainstream legislator in Washington, D.C. dared to criticize capitalism's corruption of our politics, the obscene wealth gap, the laws designed by corporations, the billionaires evading taxes, and the revolving door that keeps the 1% in charge. That all changed with Occupy, which declared that economic injustice and inequality were deliberate outcomes of policies shaped by Wall Street's greed. I'd like to cross a bridge now from the very complex history of contemporary protests to what I hope will promote a generative conversation today and in the future about a small but meaningful shift in the global economic system, perhaps another legacy from Occupy Wall Street and now tied to climate change. A survey released just last week, indicated that 35% of Americans are talking about global warming finally on a regular basis. And I looked at a recent poll in Canada that indicated that 32%, close, of Canadians select climate change as their most serious issue. So perhaps a new critical mass is wanting to emerge. I'd like to begin to tell you 3 stories. Next slide. I start with a quote from cultural historian Thomas Berry. For people generally, their story of the universe and the human role in the universe is their primary source of intelligibility and value. The deepest crises experienced by any society are those moments of change when the story becomes inadequate for meeting the survival demands of the present situation. So here's the story. In 1996, many moviegoers were treated to a film that became an instant classic called Jerry Maguire. I know some of you might remember the actor Cuba Gooding Jr. yelling, "Show me the money." A young sports agent, played by Tom Cruise, working at a big firm representing many athletes, decided to add a moral component to the job that he loves. So he presents a manifesto to his boss and the company, suggesting that the business should limit the number of clients so that each individual client could get more devoted attention, personal attention. And that would probably mean that the firm would make less money. So you can imagine in the film, Jerry tries to do the right thing. And of course, he gets pushed out and has to leave. Next slide. 25 years later, another young man is hired at BlackRock, an investment company managing assets of $9.5 trillion. Yes, that's trillions, not billions. And they're closing in on the unthinkable task of making the biggest profit possible by investing $10 trillion of other people's money. And if you have retirement funds, some of you, they may well be sitting in BlackRock. The founder of the company, Larry Fink, unlike Jerry Maguire's boss, has a bit of a conscience. And he is seriously searching for a way to balance business profits and at the same time do something to mitigate the problems caused by climate change. So he hires a man named Tariq Fancy, a young man whose passion and expertise, and now his dream job, is figuring out how to bring the idea of an overlap between maximum profit and social benefit into action across all the investment activities at the biggest investment firm in the world. Once again, trying to do the right thing, Fancy feels he must quit. There is a lesson for us here as we wrestle with the future of living on Earth. Can the emergent creativity of human beings in the industrial world, some of whom are entrepreneurs ushering in the next great scientific and technological breakthroughs, so that we can continue to enjoy the most privileged lives we in the rich countries ever experienced in human history? Can this emergent creativity also at the same time enable our species to survive climate catastrophe? Can Western science and technology, financially supported by a consumer and profit-driven global economic system, bend the arc of endless growth and profit toward the social good? Fancy found out that it doesn't work. Next slide. A few months ago, shortly after leaving his position at BlackRock, Fancy wrote an amazing manifesto of his own in the form of a public essay titled The Secret Diary of a Sustainable Investor. In remarkable detail, he shares what he uncovered working at BlackRock, why sustainable investing, sometimes called impact investing or environmental, social, and governance investing, ESGs, which is the term mostly used now for sustainable investing, ESGs. It's actually, when trying to do that, is hastening the exponential race toward global climate collapse, even as CEOs like his former boss, Larry Fink, the most prominent financial leader in the world, promotes companies like BlackRock as the best hope for a more sustainable version of capitalism. I knew I had to do it, Fancy writes about leaving BlackRock, where he was attempting to lead the effort to incorporate ESGs across all of the firm's investment strategies, hoping to hasten the reform of the market capitalism at the heart of our planetary emergency. Here's the question Fancy asked himself that unraveled his faith in the ability of global financial institutions to help society through the unprecedented challenge of climate disruption. Is it possible to be a good, socially responsible citizen while at the same time carrying out the fiduciary responsibility to make the most profit possible for the shareholders of a corporation? The answer was a resounding no. Fancy concludes there is no such thing as a free market in the first place. A market economy is a collection of rules. No rules, no game. To slow down global warming, the only answer is to change the rules. The truth is, he continues, most people have no idea what works and what doesn't. Financial leaders must know that there is no way the set of ideas they've proposed are even close to being up to the challenge of solving the runaway long-term problems that we desperately need solved. A hodgepodge of voluntary commitments and non-binding words about caring more for all stakeholders in society will not give us what we need to solve the massive systemic problems we face. Finally, according to Fancy, the system is so focused on squeezing out profits as fast as possible that the private sector which has aggressively lobbied for less rules and government regulation, is now forced to react. This is an unlikely explanation from the top of how global corporate greenwashing promotes the fantasy of clean energy and renewable emission-free technologies. Corporate marketing lures people into a sense that the corporate world is doing the right thing for people in the planet, divesting and painting a rosy picture of the future with no sacrifice from us required. We are assured that we can happily look forward to continuing our present lifestyles by putting fossil fuel-based, remember that, solar panels on the roof, charging up the new Tesla in the driveway with electricity from also fossil fuel-based wind farms on the top of the nearby hill. Ultimately, Fancy advocates a worldwide carbon tax as perhaps the only way to change the rules quickly and to perhaps force behavior change. More importantly, he insists that this and other solutions, and this is really a change at the top, that this and other solutions can only happen through government mandates, not voluntary solutions from either corporate or global political leaders. Along with looking toward industry to change the rules, expecting voluntary compliance from those managing financial investments or leading global institutions is a strategy that isn't working and cannot work in the future. Next slide. Here's a final story. Before presenting my own talk at our COP26 workshop in Glasgow in early November, I attended an economics panel where I was transfixed by a story told by economist Ralph Chamey, one of the directors of the International Monetary Fund. As most of you know, the IMF was set up at the end of World War II to stabilize the world's monetary system and track the performance of global currencies. On a whale watching trip some years ago, Chamey became enchanted by the endangered Antarctic blue whale, the largest animal on Earth. He learned that the oceans, through a series of complex biological and chemical interactions, were one of the biggest carbon sinks in the world, one of the biggest carbon sequestration locations. Furthermore, the magnificent animal he was meeting up close was part of a group of great ocean mammals that marine scientists believe responsible, this is incredible, for capturing more than 30% of the carbon that humans release into the atmosphere. A single great whale, Chamey has written, helps capture an amount of carbon equivalent to thousands of trees. So he went to work, and after 4 years of study, also recognizing that we, as Ralph says, are borrowing from future generations and from those with no voice, simply to maintain our lifestyle. He's on a mission to change the present global economy. And remember, he's at the IMF, from a degenerative economy to a regenerative one, with a deep understanding of the mindset of industrial society leaders. And to get those business leaders to the table, Chamey uses the new vocabulary of, quote, ecosystem services, which monetizes the benefits that we get from nature, like food and water, often referred to as natural capital. What is the cost to society in dollars and cents when a whale gets hit by a tanker and is killed? For this loss to have meaning in the places where policy and private sector decisions are made, he says, scientific knowledge about these benefits must be translated to monetary language that these stakeholders can understand. Fancy from BlackRock drives a stake into the heart of capitalism's profit above all mindset, concluding that under our present economic system, we can't have both profit and sustainability. From a policy standpoint, he likes the idea of a global carbon tax on emissions. Chamey at the IMF offers a gentler approach to shifting our economy from a nature deficit economy to a nature positive economy, protected by local and indigenous peoples who understand the real value of nature's gifts and what it means for future survival, to value and conserve those ecosystem services. In terms of policy recommendations, Chamey believes, somewhat like Fancy, that industries have to be assessed a monetary fine. to change behavior when scarce ecosystem resources are carelessly destroyed. Next slide. There's no free lunch. When we closely examine what is euphemistically called in the US and elsewhere clean energy and the Green New Deal, if you Google something called embodied energy, you will find that when the life cycle costs of so-called renewables, from the mining of the earth metals to the waste at the end of the life, does not help bring down the carbon load in the atmosphere. When decision makers jump on the next magic bullet, there's almost always an adjacent problem. Hydrogen is the latest, which analysts report would be very expensive and scarce in the coming decades. Therefore, equipment such as hydrogen-ready boilers could end up relying on fossil gas and continue to produce the carbon emissions driving global heating. Fusion might someday be promising, but most probably not in time. Two promising transitional models for a more planet-friendly economy are Kate Raworth's donut economy. I know some of you know about this, a framework designed to encourage an economic system that is both regenerative and distributive, fair to everyone. And the circular economy, which is already in place in several towns in Europe and America, designed to decouple growth from resource extraction and use, and especially to recycle as much waste as possible, all the waste if it's possible, back into the system. Both of these models are also clear about not overshooting the planetary boundaries. Last slide. I conclude with a challenge from my heart to join me in living as what many call a climate warrior, shifting from trying to fix what is too late to fix and joining the newly emerging conversation about an unknowable, uncertain, but potentially flourishing future that we are morally responsible for co-creating for the next generation and those coming after. As Greta Thunberg says, everyone needs to be an activist now. In 2009, Elinor Ostrom accepted the Nobel Prize in Economic Science in Stockholm, Sweden. The prize was awarded to honor her field research on how, totally unexpectedly, rules emerged in small, local communities for the common care of shared natural resources like community gardens, pastures, fishing waters, and forests. A care that was both economically and ecologically sustainable. We still have time to be a group talking together, to make change and imagine and design the birth of new local communities that foster relationships with the land and with each other, and honor the planetary boundaries that we have so carelessly breached. Terry Tempest Williams, one of my favorite Western writers, writes, "The eyes of the future are looking back on us, and they are praying for us to see beyond our own time." I invite you to join us as we at our center open doors to the future. I see that it's 1:31. Thank you so much for your attention. Merci. And I'll turn it back to Sophie.
You're muted, Sylvie.
There you go. Thank you very much, Merle. Thank you. I asked you to challenge us and you did. So I'm much appreciated for that. I just want to remind our participants that we have the Q&A box. So don't be shy to please write your question there. But I'm going to start with a first question that came from Roy. Just a second here. Here you go. So as you know, Roy is an economist. So his question is, if divestment doesn't work to contain climate change, how should we ask pension funds to invest or divest their huge portfolios?
As you know, Roy, I'm not an economist, but my suggestion is almost a little too simple, which is to invest in those NGOs and even businesses, emerging businesses that are addressing climate change at a different scale and a different level than is happening in the usual business sector. Those places those companies and those NGOs and nonprofits that really understand that everything has to change. And in order for that to happen, we've got to talk to each other. And it isn't just about investing in the latest technology, because as I talked about embodied energy, they're usually fossil fuel based. You have to begin with mining the earth metals. And you know what that's all about. So I guess my answer, which may not satisfy you completely, is look for those places where people are really going out of the box, thinking of this problem systemically, and trying to do some different things to get the conversation moving in a different direction toward the future of what Eleanor Ostrom found were local communities, where new rules emerged in those local communities to take care of everybody and the land and Mother Nature. That's my best answer I can come up with.
Thank you very much, Merle. I have a question from Susan, also on the executive at the Group of 78. And Susan was our leader for last year's annual conference on sustainability, which I know you consulted before preparing your speech. She writes, monetizing nature does not address the key problem of putting profit above all else. Ray's work models state that economics should be a means to social and ecological goals, but how to address the worship of gold rather than any iteration of God?
Oh, Susan. Oh, dear. What I didn't say in my talk, and Susan is provoking me now, which is that I think this is also a spiritual quest. Regardless, I mean, this is really what you're saying, and you're right, Susan. The closest I came was Terry Tempest at the end. This is also a spiritual quest. We have to go into very deep dialogue to question who we are and what our responsibility, our moral and ethical responsibility is, and spiritual responsibility for the generations that are coming. As I said, I have 7 grandchildren. So you're right. I hope I said, and I can't remember, that when I mentioned these other kinds of economic solutions that are being offered, that they're really transitional. They're still inside the prevailing system and the capitalist system. And we got this system, 75 years ago at Bretton Woods after World War II. And we've been living with this same system for 75 years. It's crazy. So I don't know. Again, this is how I would answer your question, Susan. Thank you so much for that, honestly.
Yeah, and thank you, Merle. I know when I first met you, you were thinking at the time of doing a Bretton Woods 3, and trying to challenge, the thinker of the world into how do we change the systems. But then your heart started to shift very quickly to sustainability and climate change, because you could see the profound changes was affecting the planet at the time. And but it's we live in a system within many other systems. So yeah, for sure. Peter asked, and myself, I must admit that I don't know what Engine 1 is, but he says, please comment on the approach of Engine 1 to use stakeholder activism, changing board members, etc. So I don't know if you understand Engine 1 too.
This is, as I said, Ralph Chammy from the IMF is trying to change the language to bring people to the table. And the language is which, is one way to do that. Not the way I would do it, but one way to do that is to monetize these, these natural things that people do value. Put a price on it, right? So I just think that another way, and you just asked this question, that might be even better is to take over corporate boardrooms. Because if you have activists who really understand what's happening with climate emergency, it's often called now, if you have activists like that at the table in the corporate boardrooms, then you don't have to do a lot of monetizing. They really know how to talk about what corporations and business can contribute to changing the entire conversation and to changing. I always say we need to change everything and we need everyone. Mm-hmm. So I love that idea. And I think it's a good one.
Yeah. Thank you, Merle. I just want to say that I'm not going to take any raised hand at this moment. So Nigel, if you don't mind, please to write your question in the Q&A box. It'll be easier for me to totally represent you. And it's easier also for our recording. Merle, I know we have, a commitment of 1 hour with you. You and I have talked a lot about, various things and trying to create, the emergent, idea that would bring not just emergent problem, but also emergent solution. And we've talked about, the success and the lack of traction of the World Social Forum. Told you I've attended few World Social Forum when there's no leaders in place and where we talk about what, could change the economy. And I know, for example, places in Europe, 3 places in Europe have kind of created their own money. They're basically are exchanging their own money for services in local environment and things like that. So because I'm not very, I'm not an economist. So when you speak of donut economy and circular economy, would that be part of this? Because I must admit that I don't really understand donut economy. So since we have a bit of time, could you give us maybe the... Yeah,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand it any better than you do, Sophie. But I think the idea is mostly about these are the planetary limits that nobody has ever paid attention to. Yeah. So, and you've seen, I didn't put a slide up of the donut economy, but you know what it looks like. It's concentric circles, right? Yeah. Kind of like a donut. Mm-hmm. And you can go to that place that pushes against those planetary limits, but you can't go any further. Yeah. And so being able to emerge, all kinds of new ideas can emerge at many different levels. I didn't say a word about Bitcoin. I didn't say a word about that because there are a lot of alternative currencies being looked at now, some of them at very high levels, as we know. Mm-hmm. And there are people who are interested in these currencies that really believe they could liberate all of us. This gets back to your question, Roy, who are trying to figure out where to invest so that it's going to work in a moral and ethical way to change things. And a lot of people believe this could be an entrance there. So both of these books, I think, and both of these and some of these new economic suggestions for solutions really go after the planetary limits and particularly in the circular economy, the waste that we produce. I mean, you've all seen pictures of plastics in the ocean. Mm-hmm. We've seen rivers of clothes, right? Rivers of clothing that has been discarded because of consumerism and buy. It's polluting everything. So we've got to do something about consumerism. We have to look at a way of bringing the waste back in so that it's not going out beyond those planetary boundaries. Some kind of planetary balance has to happen. So I'm rambling a little bit, I know, but it's both of those. I encourage people to look at both of those models because I think they're transitional models that are really interesting.
Yeah.
But the most important thing I hope I got across was that at the very top, when you're talking about somebody like Larry Fink at BlackRock, or you're talking about Ralph Chalmers at the IMF, two things that they understand is, one, that divestment isn't working, right? And we have to figure something else out. The other thing they said that might even be more important is that government is the one who has to take the lead. Now, to hear private industry at the top saying that, I think is remarkable. And I think there's a shift going on there.
Yeah, Merle, I got another question from William, but before, I just want to make a statement. So as you know, twice I was a candidate for the Green Party of Canada.
I do.
And
bless you, Sophie. That's a hard
yeah, but it didn't make any difference. But, I did it based on the principle. And as an engineer, I always said that our Earth is a closed system. So, it just is a closed system, and we have what we have. So, doing regenerative, agriculture and things like that has been a way of it's something I understood when I was very young. And now as a grandmother, I don't really know where is it we need to go. And as I said to you, I did not have the moral, the mental, courage to go to COP26 because I was at COP21. And a lot of the solution at COP21 were half-cooked engineer solution, but all the engineers in place knew they were not solution because they were not developed. And right. we were betting that we're fine, we're fine because they're gonna come online. It's like taking a train knowing that there was a missing bridge, somewhere along the path. Right. So anyway, I'm gonna ask William's question here. No country is doing enough to curb carbon emission fast enough, but which country do you think is doing the most right things right now in terms of reducing carbon emission, and how could some of these lessons maybe could be promoted or replicated?
Yeah, I wish I had anticipated and had the lists in front of me. And as Sophie said, I was working for 2 years in Sweden before COVID hit. We did 2 big conferences, actually, because it was clear to me that in the Scandinavian socialist economies, there were some things that were going much more right than were going on either here in the US or even in Canada. But there are small places around the world. I think that's maybe where this question is coming from, especially the island communities, which are absolutely on the front lines and so threatened by having to move complete cultures and complete and dozens of people. They are really looking at something beside just piling sandbags up to keep the ocean away, right? They are really searching for how do we talk about if we have to leave, which could happen very soon. If we have to move north, for example, from where I live, Santa Fe is not going to be a sustainable place very soon.
Yeah.
How are we going to manage all those people at the borders? That's one of the things. There's going to be millions, maybe billions of people at national borders soon.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm not answering the question directly. I tend to think that national boundaries now are obsolete, completely obsolete, because climate change knows no boundaries. Mm-hmm. And we're still thinking about which countries are doing the best things, right, inside their countries. And frankly, I think we should be worrying about the people that are piling up at the border already. And let me mention something because of what you said, Sophie. I, yesterday in Boulder, met with a close friend and colleague of mine who's the founder of Engineers Without Borders. We met yesterday and he left this morning for Mexico for the border between the United States and Mexico because of what's happening at the border crossing there. And they're looking at all kinds of ideas about how the communities, these local communities that Ostrom was talking about when she got her Nobel Prize, these local communities are growing up at the borders and rules are emerging and leadership is emerging. And he's very interested to see what engineers can do to help this emergent process that's happening at the borders. Did I answer that question?
Well, you give it your best. It's a very, obviously we're talking about the world right now. So, so that it's good that you can't answer all the questions in a very precise way. But I just want to, before I take Lou's question, I just want to mention that one of my realizations some years ago was about the third North Pole, which is the Himalayas. Yep. And the scientists /engineers have calculated that it won't take that much of a change in the temperature for the ice to melt, and you would have some 40 to 60 million environmental refugees. So obviously the idea of environmental refugees is compounded the complexity of what we're talking about, right? So it's the wicked problems, right?
It is. And it's often not talked about at all or enough. Because it's, as you say, it's another wicked problem that makes it really difficult to fix.
Yeah. So I have Lou's question here. I have friends who have an investment portfolio of hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'd like to meet these friends, but that is hopefully supposed to finance their retirement and hopefully, if anything is left over, provide a bit for their grandchildren. They have invested in the ESG funds. What should they do instead?
It's wonderful that they're investing in the ESG funds. Honestly, this is not an either. There's never an either or, right? There's a yes. We're in a transition moment now. We need to move forward as quickly as possible. So you don't let go of those. But what they should be investing, I have to say this, is in the activist community that are forming organizations that are truly, really facilitating new conversations to think about an unthinkable future. It's very hard to go there. It's very hard to get out of the present. When we do our work, we call it going back to the future, right? But you've got to get out there. You've got to, and another slide I didn't put up that I love is imagine, this is Einstein. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Mm. And we have an opportunity to go into our imaginations and begin to design and form these new help form these new communities that will emerge into the future, because this is where it's going to happen, because people have to grow food.
Yeah. So Merle, I have, sorry.
And I'm not an investment counselor, so I'm sorry not to answer that question.
I have one last question, but before I do that, I want to bring you back to what you started with, in the presentation. So in my some 30 years of being an activist, and not a very loud one, I have opted to do the silent things of letters, signings, fundings. I have done a lot of walking, collecting funds for Africa. Oh my God, it's more than 3 decades. But anyway, so I've done a lot of the quiet thing. In Paris, I walk the street, I give presentation, I laid on the grass for photos to be taken. I walk with police officers walking beside me because I was a greenie, right?
Yeah.
Our government I have not talked to the truckers. Okay, they now impose.
Yes, I know that.
Law, right? So really, like as an activist, that nonviolent activist, it's very difficult to swallow the recommendation of government first. I try to get inside the government with a party that was meeting my principle, and I didn't succeed. I tried on the outside, so from inside, from outside, I work for the federal government, trying on the outskirts to change a few little environmental here and there. But your talk spoke of emergency, and really I right now I'm sitting and I'm thinking, I'm likely not doing enough, and I don't know where to take the next steps.
I think this would be a great conversation. The integrative peace building network, of which I am a proud member of, I don't know if I'm the only American, but it's a growing network. We know how to do this, Sophie. You know how to do this.
Yeah.
I honestly believe that one of the next steps is to start some really different conversations, to go into dialogue with organizations that are already letting new young leadership emerge, who are saying, hey, I'm thinking about farming again. My family used to farm, but I was born in a city. I've been in a city all my life, but now I'm thinking but it sounds so awful, so hard. So, what about that? What does that mean? What am I going to do in the future? That's the question. What if we ask questions like that? What if you started farming? What would you have to do? Yeah. What are the skills that would be needed? What kind of leadership skills would emerge for farmers? It's just a very different way of asking questions about a future that hasn't happened, that we can't know because it's a nonlinear system. Yeah. So I just think there's work for us to do and you've already done a lot of it. I worked in Washington for almost 20 years, and I worked in the White House and at the highest levels. And I know that leadership also emerges in the government. You were a leader emerging, trying to get positional leadership. Well, maybe it isn't just positional leadership, right? Yeah. I mean, we now have all this social media. Maybe it's a different kind of leadership that emerges now, and it's much more distributed.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
everybody can be a leader, right?
Yeah. I have my own little garden in the back of my of the rental house I'm in, right downtown Ottawa, and I grow some my vegetable and share with my neighbors. It's a little bit, but let's take you to Roy's last question. Your message and analysis resonate with Paul Hawken's recent book, Regeneration. Is that correct?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
He believes in nuclear power as part of our future, because and he doesn't talk about embodied energy. I can't even imagine what it costs to build a new nuclear power plant, or as many as we would need all over the world. So he kind of lost me at that point, because I am not a fan of anything nuclear. Sophie knows this. I'm not a fan of nuclear weapons, and I'm not a fan of nuclear power plants, because even though once they're in place and emitting, they don't add to the carbon load. But the carbon load that's emitted in planning them and mining them and producing them and refining them and getting them up online is huge and vast. And all you have to do is look at Japan right now to see what happens at the end of the line. This made no sense to me. And that's where I sort of separated from what Paul Hawken was trying to do. I said, we can't promote this. Mm-hmm. So Drawdown, you're talking about his book, Drawdown. And he's been working for a very long time at this. He really is one of our early environmental heroes, but I don't think he has the answers now.
Well, if I may, Sylvie, I'd be interested in hearing what you do agree with, because so much of what he talks about in regeneration addresses the very issues that you were, in terms of not extracting from the earth, but putting back in the earth in the way of ensuring survival and prosperity, real prosperity for generations to come. Think of ourselves as part of the biodiversity that we're trying to protect. When the chimpanzees perish, we perish too, in a way.
That's right.
Directly and indirectly. Jane Goodall has a very interesting foreword to that book. So I'd be interested to know what you liked about it, because I think
there's lots of, you just said Paul Hawken has been at this for decades, and he understands what you were talking about, Roy, those regenerative processes that have to do with the soil, for example. We can't grow food in the soil that we have just about everywhere in the world now. The soil is contaminated. We know that. You can't even talk about this until you talk about how do you regenerate soil. That's the beginning. And he's really good on this. And he understands that this is part of the cycle of life that has to be addressed if we're going to have any kind of sustainable future for our kids, our grandkids, and for all the creatures that share the planet with us, right? I call them the more than human species. So you're right. I have such a fear. Remember, I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm downwind from Los Alamos, and I spent 4 years as a guest scientist at Los Alamos at a think tank there. And I can tell you they're building the next generation of nuclear weapons. And so even embracing nuclear at any level is, as you saw, is a trigger for me. Mm-hmm. But you're right. I definitely tell people to read the book because there's lots of good ideas at a very local level that I was talking about before, how to form new communities and the kind of regenerative agriculture, for example, that you have to do to be able to live, take care of the water, take care of the air.
Roy, I just got one last question. So I think so it's from Susan. She writes, nuclear has so many long-term toxic issues as well. We need to address the issue of what is prosperity.
Yes, that's a great press. It's well-being for everybody, all the creatures that share the planet. That's how I have to answer that question. I didn't talk about the Gross National Happiness Index in Bhutan because I spent time in Bhutan, and I also spent time at the UN when the Bhutanese released the Gross National Happiness Index. And it's all about what prosperity could mean if we measured the economy differently, not just GDP, right?
Yeah.
So it is about, it's about well-being for everybody, right? And that's what the Gross National Happiness Index is all about.
Well, I think that's a very nice way, Roy, of finishing on a positive note. So
you're turning back to me?
Yes, I'm turning it back to you.
Okay. Well, I'm almost sad that this session is ending because there's so much more to be said. But yes, what is it all about? Well-being? Well, well-being is a question of being well, and that embraces the whole biosphere, not only us, but every living thing, right? And I really thank you, Merle, for stimulating us and challenging us. And I know that there are many questions that people would still like to raise.
Well, they can get in touch with me, and I loved the questions. Actually, they were great, and they stimulated me also, and I appreciate it very much. So, Thank you, everybody. I hope I'll be in Ottawa soon. I'm trying hard to get back. So,
and I'd like to thank Sylvie for moderating so deftly, and to Sarah for helping from our control room, as she always does so well. And for everyone who participated in our audience, I'd like to hear more from you. If you had any feedback on this session, please get in touch with us. And be well and take care.
Thank you so much, everybody. Yes. Thank you, Sophie and Susan, too.
Thank you, Merle. Thank you, everyone. Yes.
Bye, everybody. Enjoy your winter weather.
and your activism. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.